Good morning. Hello and welcome to another session in this series. What is Agile and why are people going gaga over it? Before we start today's session, let's quickly recap the topics from last week. We learned last week what is a project and how is it different from a routine work. According to PMI, Project Management Institute, a project is something that is a one-time activity with a definite start and an end. For example, if you are an auto mechanic, rebuilding a 1967 Mustang is a project, versus changing brake pads and engine oils of cars every day is a routine work. Then we talked about project lifecycle. We talked about 4 phases of project lifecycle. Number 1, define, where we gather requirements. Number 2, planning, designing. Number 3, which is the longest phase of the project, execution. And number 4, closing the project once it is delivered. And we ended our session last week exploring what is a methodology and why is methodology important in project management. So moving into our session 2, let's talk about what are the objectives for our session today. We will take a deep dive into methodologies. Then we will learn differences between Agile and Waterfall. And we will end by understanding what type of methodology is best suited for your project. So how to choose the right methodology. So as we talked about methodology last week, methodology is nothing but a set of processes that will help you complete a type of activity. Now, why is methodology important in project management? We spoke about that also briefly, because it allows you to standardize your processes, make them repeatable. And what does repeatable allows you? Repeatable makes your project more predictable. And that's what we want. We want predictable outcomes to our projects. We want our projects to become a science more than an art. So there are a lot of different types of methodologies available out there today. You have heard of Waterfall, Agile, Scrum, Safe Agile, Kanban. But if you boil all these methodologies, I will put them into 2 categories. Number 1, where we have a predictable flow of work, which is an Waterfall is an example of it, right? So project phases flow in a linear line. So one phase begins when other phase ends. Now, second major categories of methodologies are Agile, and Scrum is an example of it. Now, in Agile, we break our work into multiple increments, and then each increment is worked on in an iterative fashion. And we will talk more about these items next week when we talk about Scrum. We will deep dive into Scrum and we'll talk about sprint and PI and all those kinds of things, how we break work into increments and then increments into sprints. Now let's take an example of a waterfall project. Why waterfall may be the only option in certain industry sectors. And one sector that very widely still continue to use waterfall is construction industry, right? Because you cannot build your level 2 without building level 1, and even within level 1 you cannot have electrician come in before framers have come in, and framers cannot come in before the foundation is done. So let's take an example. Close your eyes and imagine that you are building a beautiful home for yourself. So what process would you go through? Number one, define stage, where you will gather requirements. You will finalize the location, the size of the house. You want 2,000 square feet home, 5,000 square feet home, 10,000 square feet home, how many bedrooms you need, how many bathrooms you need, and things like that. So all the requirements are gathered, and that's the first stage of constructing a house, right? Next phase is what? A design phase, where you will engage an architect who will come in and create all the architectural designs for your home. You will select a model, which will then be sent over to city for approval. Once that is approved, you will solicit quotations from various contractors, and then you will engage a contractor, which will bring us to our third phase, the longest phase, as I mentioned before, our execution phase, construction phase, as we call in building homes. And then the contractor will bring in various trade folks. So foundation will be the first one. Once the foundation is done, you will bring in carpenters. After carpenters will come in electricians and plumbers to fish their wires and pipes through the frame. And then comes the drywall folks to put all the drywall, and then the painters, and then the closing bit of it. Now imagine again, as the framing is done, cabling is done, drywall is on, you decide that I want to build another room. Let alone building a room, I want to increase the size of a room, or adding additional electrical outlets, or changing from 15 amp to 20 amp cable. Yes, you can do all those things, but these changes will not only be expensive, but will push your timelines further out. And that is one of the biggest drawback of waterfall. Your requirements must be solid, because anytime your requirement shifts, the cost of rework is humongous. And that brings us to our next methodology, Agile. Now, Agile has been out there for years, decades, right? Agile Manifesto was first published in 2001. So why has Agile just picked up, or more and more organizations are picking up Agile just recently? Last 5, 6 years has been a major push for Agile, in my observation. Now, there are two primary factors that have uh, worked as a catalyst for Agile, right? Number one is the maturation of Agile. So initially, Agile framework was not very um, robust, that can be used on large enterprise-wide implementations. But today, Agile frameworks are a lot more robust with things like SAFe. And second, which is more important from my perspective, is that Agile is better equipped at dealing with disruptions. Right? We all know how every organization is grappling with disruption. Right? You don't want to be next Kodak or Blockbuster, or what is happening with taxi industry with Uber, and hotel industry with Airbnb. So organizations are continuously evolving, and you cannot take years to build a new product or new service. You need to be able to get there much faster. And the new mantra is fail fast and often. So if you have a new idea, you want to get that idea executed in front of your users, and users are able to test it and give you a feedback from which you can learn, and if need to, pivot accordingly. And Agile is perfect for that. Now let's take another example. Okay, imagine you have a travel agency, and today more and more of your customers are using websites to book their travel reservations, or at minimum do the research for their next vacation. Hence, you have decided to put together a website. So what will the process you will go through? Just like building a house, you will go through define, where you will gather requirements. What kind of searchability do I need to provide to my users? Search by destination, search for duration, search for travel date, search for budget, etc., etc., etc. And the next is you create designs. As part of the design, you will have to do a database design, how the screens will flow. The user experience is very, very important. And then you will get the quotes from various contractors. And then you will go on to the execution phase, where actual development and testing of your website will happen. And then you will close your project once you deploy it into production. Now, you have to choose a methodology here. You can choose a waterfall or you can choose an agile. So how would you go about choosing, right? So in waterfall, you have to make sure that all your requirements are defined upfront before a single line of code is even written. And in agile, you will continuously evolve and elaborate your requirements as you build your website. And the work will be done, as we discussed at the start of the session, in increments, and then within increments and iterations of sprints, and which will allow you to change your requirements based on the feedback that your users are giving you. So let's take an example, right? What does that mean? I'm using a term MVP. You may have heard the term MVP. What is a must-have product that needs to go out to market? So you cannot take a website out to the people which only gives you ability to search by destination, but no duration, whether you want to go for 2 days or 5 days or 7 days or 14 days. There's no option like that. That won't go very well. So you need to think about that. What would be minimum features that my website must have before I can deploy to production? And then slowly you will build on that website sprint after sprint after sprint after sprint. So let's take an example of destination, right? So now destination could be many things to many people. Destination could mean I should have ability to search for a city. So for example, I want to go to Orlando or Cancun, you know, or I should have ability to search by country. I want to go to Cuba. I want to go to Jamaica. I want to go to Dominican Republic. I want to go to Mexico, and show me all my options within that country. Or I can go and say, I don't want to do such city by city or country by country. Show me all the sun destinations. I want to see all sun destinations and compare them. So you can have multiple different options to choose from. Now, when you're building this thing, what do you think is a must have that your website can go into production? And then based on the feedback from your users, you will choose the next major enhancements and improvement on your website. And that is what Agile allow you to do. So in nutshell, Agile is adaptive, which means your scope of project evolves over time. You don't have to define every single requirement upfront. All the I's don't need to be dotted. Number two, early detection of defects and problems. Continuous integration, verification, and validation improves the probability to find defects and any missed or incomplete requirements. Number three, and to me this is the most important principle, end user engagement through all the phases of SDLC, and SDLC stands for Software Development Lifecycle. Because end users are engaged early on in the project, during the design phase, gathering requirements, as well as because of the iterative nature, each sprint, the stories are prioritized by end users. There is a greater likelihood of user acceptance. In nutshell, the key advantage of Agile is its iterative approach, which makes it flexible. If you are working on a project that has an uncertain scope, which means your requirements are still in flux, then Agile would be my recommended methodology for you. So with that, we will end our session for today. Next session, we will focus on Scrum and what are the various ceremonies that we use when we are doing a Scrum project. Thank you very much. Have a very productive day and week. See you next week. Adios.